We know that on the 80th anniversary, the events themselves start to pass from living memory from that generation that lived, experienced, and fought on those beaches into the stories that we tell each other, that we remember ourselves. And I think that makes it really important that this is a commemoration, not a celebration, as we've heard before as well, that this becomes something which tells us a lot about the sacrifices that took place on the beaches at Normandy. You mentioned already it's a really important site of politics, of presentation, of framing that memory of what states can be, what nations can rise to, and what people want to see represented of themselves. And so I think this ceremony, the British ceremony at Vers-sur-Mer, is really important, because what it does is it highlights that role as part of this larger Allied invasion, this larger Allied landing, which started the process of the liberation of France. It marks that moment, that kind of firing pistol, as it were, the starting pistol, for this whole liberation from occupation by the Germans. And that, I think, is a really crucial thing to mark at this stage.
And Andrew, as our other Andrew here on set was talking about earlier on, it reminds us as well that the threat of war is never far away. I mean, here on France 24, of course, we're covering those events in Gaza, but perhaps more notably here in Europe, those events in Ukraine as well, of course. Emmanuel Macron has threatened, if that's the right word, to send more troops or at least more French aid to help the Ukrainians. And perhaps that's something we should be thinking about as well as we remember what happened 80 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. We mentioned, you heard a kind of roundup of the different ceremonies and their context. Back in 1949, when General Montgomery spoke on the beaches, he was criticised in the British Parliament for being sort of hawkish in the way he talked about it. That, of course, was the moment in 1949 when the NATO treaty was actually signed. Talking about that, he spoke at that moment about how he would be, proud to die in France defending British and French honour. Then that moment of the kind of proximity of war really put an edge on that. And I think we can see that again today, as you mentioned. There is really something quite strong and powerful about this idea of bringing the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, as you mentioned, to be part of this while excluding the Russian aggressors as well. And that, I think, is very, very significant. You, of course, got the kind of representatives from many of the other nations who were represented during that period as well, the Canadians, the Germans, and even the Italian president as well. And of course, we know there is the upcoming G7 summit in Puglia at the end of the month. And that kind of thing gives us a sense that this is about political alliances and military alliances today, as much as it is about the memory and commemoration of those brave events of the past.